We're going to focus on the business unit AQ Med, which focuses on improving cardiac care using new medical devices. We're going to talk about how synthetic data is used, and one way we use it to support the development of those devices when we're acquiring, while we're acquiring real data from real patients. And finally, we'll also talk a little bit about how that can accelerate a timeline for a medical device, which is new and doesn't have access to a lot of data. So here, focusing a little bit on the mission of cardiovascular diseases, it's been the #1 cause of death globally for more than 30 years. And so there is a need to do better at diagnosing and at monitoring these conditions. So the most common type of cardiovascular disease is coronary artery disease. And this is when the arteries that are going to the cells inside of your heart can't get enough blood and thus can't get enough oxygen because there's plaque obstructing those pipes. And when that happens, those cells, when they would normally be able to conduct electricity in order to pump the muscle and send blood to the rest of your body, they can't do that anymore. And then you start feeling chest pain, and eventually that can lead to a heart attack and cell death or myocardial infarction. So for some patients who show up to the hospital with some of these symptoms, it's very clear based on just an EKG, an ECG, that they need to go get care right away. But for the majority of patients, actually, it's not exactly immediately clear what the physician should do to give you the best treatment. And so there's a whole battery of tests that are done that serve as proxies for actually what is happening with the cells inside your heart, which ones are not able to conduct electricity properly. And they range from not being specific enough or not sensitive enough. They have high radiation. They're very expensive, might be time consuming, or they end up being invasive. And they may or may not need to have happened. And so what we're doing is we're looking at a technology called magnetocardiography, or MCG. And this captures the unique diagnostic information that arises when those cells are firing electrically. Maxwell's equation tells us that there's an associated magnetic field. And we capture that magnetic field using our device directly above the chest of a patient. And that magnetic field map that we might acquire, here are some examples from the literature, have very big differences between healthy volunteers and patients who are having a heart attack. And not only is it different, but there's a lot of detailed information in these maps that can tell us about what is actually happening electrically inside the heart, but in a non-contact and non-invasive way. So how come we don't see MCG everywhere in every hospital? So the current MCG devices are large, they're expensive, they're cumbersome to maintain, and that's limited the clinical adoption. So this is a new technology. It's been proven in the academic research for several decades, but it hasn't quite penetrated into hospitals, partially because all the commercial MCG devices currently require a large magnetically shielded environment, or they require liquid helium cryogenics, and that's kind of a non-starter for a hospital. So it's kind of a bummer that this technology can't really help patients because the how it fits into the workflow is not good. So at Sandbox, what we've done is we've developed an unshielded mobile bedside device that can perform MCG. And so this is a rendering of our device and is also this exact rendering of the device we have in several hospitals today. So that's all great, but this is where the challenges come up, right? Unshielded MCG is ideal for the physicians, but it's really unideal from a perspective of signal to noise. These hospitals and clinics, they're full of magnetic interference, which is much, much larger than the amplitude of the magnetic signals that come from your heart. So not to mention the geomagnetic field, which is about 1,000,000 times larger, but the MRI machine in the floor above, the infusion pump next to the patient, the iPhones in the nurses' pockets, all these things are actually going to swamp the signal of interest. So AI is actually quite good at predicting the signal and noise components of these of the MCG, and we can use it to extract the signal quite cleanly, as is demonstrated by this workflow here. The second challenge is that these MCG maps are full of detailed cardiac signal, but physicians don't really know how to interpret it. So even though we might say, yes, this map is from a sick person or this map is from a healthy person, they want to know actually what's happening underneath. And so AI is excellent at recognizing and predicting patterns in medical image data. So these are the two areas in which we want to apply AI to these images, to the data from our medical device. They need a lot of data. So to do this, AI models need a lot of data, but clinical studies take a lot of time. And so we have a new medical device, but a very small patient sample. Even though with our small number of devices that we have today, even if we run them at full speed with as many patients as we can, it's just not enough data to actually train these models sufficiently. Um, and so hand it off to Haley, who'll talk about how we can solve that problem.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. Hello, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a challenge that is faced by a lot of developers of AI for medical diagnostics, which is data scarcity. Um, so for us, the answer to this challenge has been synthetic data. We have been using synthetic data as a bridge to help us build out our infrastructure and really develop our um, data processing and AI training pipeline while we're waiting for large-scale clinical studies to produce real patient data for us. And I want to emphasize at this point that we are not trying to take shortcuts through the clinical study route. We have some clinical studies underway with our clinical partners, and real patient data is extremely important for safety and accuracy. What we are trying to do is reduce the number of clinical trial iterations required to get the best diagnostic system because clinical trials can be prohibitively expensive, particularly when you're trying to get enough data to train an AI. So here's a little bit about our simulation pipeline. So we use physics to transform ECG into synthetic MCG. So this is not Gen AI. This is a physics engine that we're using to produce our data. So the first step is we acquire real 12-lead ECG recordings. These are from large publicly available databases. And then we apply transforms to extract, or rather to convert them into vectorcardiography, VCG, which is a 3D representation of the electrical currents. We then apply a physics equation to extract the magnetic fields that would be associated with those electrical currents. And that provides us with the large scale synthetic MCG it gives us sort of the broad features of MCG for model training. So let's talk about trust in synthetic medical data. It's really important that our synthetic medical data closely resembles the distribution of real data, both in the fidelity of the signal. So the fidelity represents how well synthetic MCG reflects characteristics of real MCG, and also in the diversity of the signal. So how well our synthetic data represents data that we might see from a wide variety of patients. So the way that we do this is for fidelity, we compute quantitative metrics that test how similar our real data is to the distribution of our synthetic data. So one example of such a fidelity metric could be peak signal-to-noise ratio. Signal-to-noise ratio is the maximum possible power of a signal versus the power of corrupting noise. So we can compute the peak SNR for all of the samples in our synthetic data and in our real data. And if these distributions are statistically similar, then we can feel reasonably confident that our synthetic data represents the level of noise that our device might see in a real hospital. Other fidelity metrics that we could use to assess how similar they are could be image similarity metrics, vector similarity metrics. We can compare distributions of various biomarkers, and we could even run a classifier model to try to classify whether each sample is real data or synthetic data. So all of these metrics are ways that we can quantitatively assess how similar our synthetic data is to the real thing. And with regard to diversity, the fact that we simulate our data based on real ECG means that our data represents the diversity of a real patient population. So, like I said, we have been using synthetic data as a tool, one of many tools in our toolbox, to help us build out the infrastructure of our AI development pipeline while we're waiting for that real clinical data to come in. And there's a couple different ways we can do this. And I'll expand on these more in a moment, but we can do model comparison, exploring what sorts of architectures are best for extracting features from our data. We can do pre-training for large deep neural networks for denoising, for example, and even some fine tuning maybe for diagnostics, and of course, hyperparameter tuning. So let's look at a couple of specific case studies or use cases for synthetic data in our pipeline. So use case number one is denoising. And I want to return to what Jeff was talking about before about all of this magnetic interference that we see in hospitals and clinics. Um, this is the reason why most existing MCG devices have to be installed in these large magnetically shielded rooms. And just to give you an idea of the scale of the problem, imagine that you're at a cocktail party and you're trying to pay attention to the voice of one single person, but you have to pick out their voice over not just the ambient noise of the party around you, but also there happens to be a jet engine in the room with you. Um, Kind of a silly example, but this really shows the scale of the problem that we're up against. This is a really difficult signal to noise ratio that we're dealing with. And now imagine that you have large scale synthetic data, and then we take noise that was recorded from a real hospital setting, one of our clinical sites perhaps, and we overlay that noise on top of our synthetic data. And now we have a large scale data set of synthetic data that really represents noise that our device might actually encounter in hospital. And then we train a large deep neural network to remove that noise. Then when we take our real MCG data collected from patients in hospital and we pass it through this large deep neural network trained on synthetic data, we get this really nice, beautiful heartbeat signal that's much, much cleaner than we would get through traditional denoising methods like PCA, which is obviously very helpful for diagnosis. Use case number two is model selection and feature exploration. So once we have passed our data through this denoiser neural network, we have this nice clean signal. We still need to make a determination about whether that recording is showing cardiac disease, and if so, what kind. So imagine that we have access to a number of different large pre-trained models. They're pre-trained on various different types of data, such as medical data like ECG. We can take our large-scale synthetic data and fine-tune these large pre-trained models, and then we can compare their performance on real patient data as well as a holdout test set of our large-scale synthetic data. And doing this gives us an idea of what is the architecture type, the pre-training domain, the model size, how many parameters are appropriate for effectively extracting the kinds of features that we're looking for to diagnose disease. Another thing that we can do at this stage is a little more exploratory. So we can actually use explainability or interpretability methods to try to get an idea of how these models are making their decisions about our real patient data or our synthetic data. And we can look at the features they're extracting, and that can kind of give us an idea of what sorts of features are most helpful for us in detecting disease. And can we possibly even sort of discover new biomarkers or get a really deep understanding of the rich feature space that these large models are working with. Now, throughout all of this, experiment tracking is extremely important. So when making medical predictions, it's very important for the development pipeline to have traceability and reproducibility. Medical devices have to meet strict regulatory standards that require documentation. Um, when a algorithm is making a prediction that might be used by a clinician as evidence to make a medical decision, the FDA does not evaluate that based on vibes. They want to know exactly how you came up with that prediction. They want to see end to end, how did you develop this system? And experiment tracking with software like Weights and Biases really helps us keep track of all of this documentation, keep track of how we trained these algorithms, and it makes it really easy to compare metrics across clinical trials and across development iterations of our models. We use a private instance with Weights and Biases, so we can actually do all this while maintaining HIPAA compliance, which is obviously very important for maintaining our agreements with our clinical collaborators. I also love the visualization, so it helps us assess at a glance like which models are performing best. This is just a little screen cap of some tinkering that I was doing, looking at the effect that model size has on performance on some of our synthetic data and like how long we can train these models before they start to overfit. So this is my last slide. I'm going to leave you with a couple of thoughts on the future of medical device AI. We believe that our MCG device is going to transform cardiac care. It's going to supplement existing diagnostic tools, not replace them. It's not going to replace ECG or blood tests, but it is going to be an additional highly effective tool that clinicians will have in their toolbox to make fast and accurate diagnoses. Diagnostic algorithms are going to be more generalizable to diverse patients because they can be trained on much larger, more diverse data sets with the addition possibly of synthetic data. Denoising algorithms like the one I talked about a few slides ago are going to unlock clinical adoption of new devices in new hospital settings. And finally, new devices and diagnostic algorithms are going to come to market faster using synthetic data to shorten the number of clinical trial iterations as we're doing at AQMed. And I'll point you over to our QR code there. So we have a blog. We have a post that went up this morning. The topic is covering a lot of stuff that we've talked about today in our talk. And you can also read a lot about other projects that Sandbox is working on and get future updates on the AQMed team. So that's it. Thank you so much for your attention.